Hey everyone, welcome. Looks like we're all here, hopefully. Just checking on things. I hope you can anyone hear me? Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Okay, so we're just waiting on Alex and Karl to hop in here. Let's see if I can run them down. Yeah, hey Dell. Yeah, I'm he's a big Star Wars geek. Star Wars and Disney, Dell. That's my life. Karl, if you go ahead and make a request in your upper right-hand corner there, you should say a request to share your screen, and I can go ahead and get you in here. Who's supposed to be your moderator? Oh, that'd be Pat. Okay. I almost called you Pot. Don't know why. Okay, it looks like oh yeah, hey Jeff, the guitars are there. The guitars they're all around me, actually. They're everywhere. I've got a lot of guitars. In fact, I don't know if I can. I've got cases. Hey, there he is.
Yay, it works.
So let me pan around here, Jeff. I've got guitars back here, and I've got guitar cases on the floor.
Nice.
They're all over the place. Okay, well, I'm
exactly all of the places they should be.
Yeah. Thanks. So, so Karl, if you want to go ahead and request. Oh, Pat, you've got this. You know what you're doing.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to jump out and then jump back in, not as a sharer. Hold on.
Gotcha. So at I see you, Alex. You should be able to, I think it's, there you go. You got it. I think it's at the upper right. Is that right?
Yeah.
Like ask to share audio and video.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Outstanding.
Let me give Karl a second to show up in the moderation queue. There he is. Awesome. I will do the introductions, and then we're good to go.
Okay.
Sound check for Karl real quick.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Perfect.
You can see me.
Yay. Excellent. Okay. So super brief intros to give these gentlemen the time they deserve. We have Alex Peay. Oh, he disappeared. There he is. What are you? Director of Product Management for Salt Integrations in VMware. Is that something like that? Okay. And then Karl Fultz on the technical marketing management side. Is that right?
That is correct.
Do you see how I'm very excellently guessing exactly all of the things that constitute my job
You've done a great job.
with respect to SaltConf moderation? Okay. Definitely appreciate your time, both of you. Everybody always has plenty of questions, particularly in terms of road mapping, which is something that I constantly pull Alex into against his will with respect to compliance and vulnerability management in VRA and in particular SaltStack SecOps. So with that, I will give it over to you guys and I will get out of your way. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Patrick. You wouldn't have had to have guessed if we would have sent our bios over like we were supposed to a couple weeks ago. So no worries on the guessing there. I'm also noticing that I'm just so used to blocking my blurring out my background, how messy my office has become over the last few months, and so I wish that I had tidied up before we got going here. So as hopefully all of you were expecting, we're going to talk a little bit about compliance and vulnerability management. So let me go ahead and share my screen. It's not showing the screen I want to show. Let's see. So with that, are you able to see the deck that just got the SaltConf 21 item up? Anyone seeing my screen?
I am not. I'm still seeing you.
Not seeing it yet.
All right, let's see here. Let's try that. How about now? Nope, it's not sharing for me. That's weird.
He's going to just have to read it to us.
Yeah, that might take a while, like a screen reader. That could be a good way of doing it. Geez, let's see. That's really weird. Let me make some adjustments here.
Can we, while I just want to check, let me just make sure I can share my screen while we're doing this.
Or worst case, you can, yeah, that works.
Okay.
You can always, if it's, is it just a deck, Alex? I'm happy to also fail to share it.
Yeah, let's see.
The one thing that I had trouble with, Alex, was, I don't know if you're in Firefox, but I had to switch to Chrome.
No, I'm using Chrome.
All right. I tried.
Fire window. And none of my windows are coming up. So maybe
the other thing that I can do is I can share the SecOps deck if you'd like.
if you can do that, that's probably best because
Yeah.
when I go into share, none of my screens come up, which is weird because it was working.
No worries. It's it seems to be kind of temperamental this year, not a big deal. And just it's you used up your luck trial running it.
Yeah. All right. So maybe there's some Q&A that we can get going on already. Maybe so while we wait to get this pulled up, I'll answer one of the questions there. It says, is vRealize Automation SaltStack config included in the VMware user group exclusive licenses benefit? I'm going to have to be honest there. You're going to have to give me more information on what the VMware user group exclusive license benefit is. That's a new one to me.
It's sort of a long-term trial license, and I would have to check. VRA is, I think it gets you an enterprise trial license, and I'd have to confirm with the VMUG folks that SaltStack config is included.
Okay. All right.
To that end, any iteration of VRA that you're entitled to will include SaltStack config.
Yes. Okay, so this is actually it's the same slides, Alex, just a slightly different deck, and I apologize. This is the one I normally use, but you'll be able to pick it up. Pick up the flow.
All right. So as with any good roadmap deck, we're gonna be talking about some futures here. So we definitely want your input. We want your insights. We want to know what you're thinking and what you're seeing. But at the same time, as we have these discussions, it's going to adjust and influence the roadmap. Otherwise, these wouldn't be very fruitful. So this is simply saying that as we go forward, some of these things might change on timing or delivery. So next slide. And so as we kind of start these off, and it's really kind of apropos, I think, for this group. Of course, the acquisition happened about a year ago. One of the things that happened immediately and has continued to evolve is the fact that SaltStack config and by extension SaltStack SecOps has become a feature within VRA, right? So SaltStack config is basically a sibling to Service Broker, CodeStream, all these other great VRA features. And then SaltStack SecOps is an add-on to that. Right, and so if you're a VRA customer, then you've got entitlement to SaltStack config today, and then you can add to any instance of VRA the SecOps capabilities. Right, of course, if you're using the config components and config pieces of that. The other thing that's worth noting is with the acquisition, we created a new SKU within VRA. So before you had advanced and enterprise editions, and now there's a standard plus edition, which is effectively just SaltStack config. Delivered through VMware and through VMware licensing, right? So if you remember back a year ago, we talked about SaltStack Enterprise. And so VRA Standard Plus is effectively that same set of functionality and capabilities delivered through the VRA portfolio at that tier called VRA Standard Plus. And of course, we work on hybrid, public, and all the different clouds. Next slide. Now, one of the great things that's happened, I think, from a SaltStack standpoint, as we've come into VMware, is that it's allowed us to expand what we do and where we do it. I think everybody that's used Salt for a while knows, of course, that SaltStack is able and capable of delivering on all these different use cases. One of the things I think that we struggled with was having the breadth of the ability to get that message out. So SaltStack can do network automations. Of course, we can do DevOps infrastructure. And of course, we're focused today talking about security operations. Being at VMware has allowed us to have a broader platform and a broader microphone to tell that story. And we dovetail really well into that same kind of platform and marketing story that VRA was already telling across these 5 different areas and 5 different focuses. And SaltStack, of course, brings augmentation to each one of these areas. And today we're going to focus in on the far right and discuss vulnerability management and compliance, continuous compliance. Next slide. As part of that kind of growth and integration that takes place over time, we're seeing, of course, as I mentioned, that SaltStack is part of that VRA Standard Plus piece. It's also part of the broader VRA portfolio. And as such, if you're a VRA customer, if you're already familiar with VRA, you'll be able to see us in the services panels. We'll be able to be a click and a drop down that brings you into the SaltStack capabilities. And as we go through time, that'll become a more integrated and more seamless experience. And our goal is to, of course, have that be through the services panels, but also be part of what's called the cloud templates, so that you're able to drag and drop those componentries from SaltStack into your existing templates, be able to adjust code there in the cloud templates UI, and then be able to execute Salt kind of in stream with the other VRA components. We've accomplished, I would say, a subset of these things thus far in our progression. Others are coming in the next quarter as we finish out some of these template design items, and we'll continue to augment that, of course, as we move into 2022. Of course, the primary Salt use cases have always been that software configuration management, which SaltStack Config is really focused in on, along with the day 2 automation using things like beacons and reactors. And of course, in the last couple of years, we've really been focused in on this IT automation or IT compliance automation and vulnerability management, which is under our SecOps capabilities. And what we thought was really important, or what we saw in the market as we were going through this, was this notion that SecOps, a lot like DevOps, were these 2 teams that had long been disparate, working together to get to the same common goal. Right? There was this notion that a security team and the operations team were distinct users. It's interesting. That's one of the things that we really talked a lot about at the point of the acquisition was, hey, maybe the security stuff is really only under the purview of Carbon Black or somebody in a different business unit. But the reality is, we started to see, and we've continued to see, these operations and security users coming together to build a compliant infrastructure that achieves the same goals, right? The operations teams, the business units are really looking, saying, hey, we need to deliver things faster. We need to be able to get our applications to our customers' hands so that they can have success. And at the same time, the security teams have to keep those systems compliant, those applications running on an infrastructure that's secure. And so the reality is, if they don't work together, they ultimately fall apart and fail together. And so we're seeing more and more of these teams coming together saying, we can't have speedy operations if the infrastructure is not secure. We can't have a secure infrastructure that's so locked down that nothing ever works. And so we're seeing more and more of these security and operations users coming together to leverage automation to make sure that the infrastructure is safe and secure, and that the applications are running in a way that they should to be successful for the business. Next slide. This kind of gets back and take kind of a step back, if you will, into what I was mentioning a little earlier. We've got this breakout of the various vRealize products, the Standard Plus, the Advanced, and the Enterprise. Right. This is again a portfolio play where it grows one on top of the other. On the far left is what was known as SaltStack Enterprise, and then you can go up in those features and take advantage of some of those other sibling services that I mentioned at the beginning. The other key thing to understand before we get too far into this presentation is that SecOps component is an add-on to these portfolio offerings. And so regardless of whether you're using Standard Plus or Enterprise, you can go in and purchase and then integrate the SecOps capabilities and the content stream that comes with it for your particular environment. So as we dig into each one of those areas, right, there's two sides to the coin, if you will, as we look at the SecOps componentry. The first is vulnerability management, right? And so SaltStack works with pulling down the known vulnerabilities from CVEs that have been released by the different operating system companies or distributions, if you will. Those are then, of course, applied to the minions that you've got. We're able to scan those minions, identify where there's a known vulnerability, associate that with the advisory ID, and then, of course, be able to remediate or take action on that individual asset. And in reality, that last piece is what we think has always been the key from a SaltStack standpoint, right? You know that there's already third parties out there like Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7, Kenna, Carbon Black, if we look within the VMware portfolio, that can do those scans and that can identify where those vulnerabilities are. And we partner with them. We think they provide a great service, but there's a key piece there that's missing. And so if we go back to that SecOps definition, you know, it's not enough just to have the list of security vulnerabilities that your typical security admin finds. It's also important to be able to take that to an operational level and take action. And so from a SaltStack standpoint, we always look at that saying, how can we take the action and close the loop? And so we can scan and identify those issues, or we can take the reports from any one of those third parties. But the big thing is that we can then take the action to fix it. And so from our standpoint, as we look at vulnerability management, the question isn't, how can we show you everything that's wrong? We can do that, and we can partner with others to do that. But the bigger question is, how can we reduce the time from the identification of the vulnerability to the remediation of that vulnerability? And that's where the real value of a security solution comes, right? It's not just enough to know something's wrong. It has to be enough that you can go in, find it, and fix it quicker than your adversary can. And that's really what we look at with vulnerability management. And of course, we can do this for all the Linux distributions, I should say the major Linux distributions, as well as Windows that came out about a year ago. The other side of this coin, if we go to the next slide, is continuous compliance enforcement, right? And so if we can secure the infrastructure from the vulnerabilities that we know, then we can have confidence both as a security team and an operations team that the known vulnerabilities won't be exploited. The second part of this is, now that I know that I've taken care of everything that's known, how can I configure my system in a way that's secure, consistent, and hardened? And so from a SaltStack standpoint, we rely on the Center for Internet Security and for CIS and STIGs as definitions of secured and properly configured system should look like. We build that content as a content stream so that you as the user can simply consume those benchmarks that have already been created, and then customize those to your own needs. And so that customization can take a couple of forms, and we'll see that a little bit later in the demonstration. You can either go in and select individual checks within a benchmark, right? So a CIS benchmark's normally got about 220 different checks. Maybe you're only interested in the SSH items, or maybe you're only interested in other pieces or parts. And so you can pick out those individual parts and create a customized policy. Additionally, and I think that Dave Boucher went over this in his session, you can create custom checks that do things specific to you. So for example, let's say you've got a Windows machine and you want that to reboot every 14 days. That's not actually something that's enforced from CIS, but you could create your own custom benchmark, or sorry, your own custom check that does that, pull that into your policy, and now that'll run alongside with your CIS and CIS and STIGs capabilities. Now what this does, of course, is once you've created that policy, we actively scan, identify where there's a discrepancy between your policy and any one of your minions that are being scanned. And again, we take the pride or the focus to the action level. So it's not enough just to give you a report that says, hey, these are the things that are on fire, or these are the things that need attention. We also make it really easy for you to click a button, remediate those based off of the content that's been provided, and put them in the state that you're looking for. What that does is a couple things. Of course, one, it reduces that mean time to remediation, but two, it should make life a lot easier. So as we talk to our customers, as we talk to auditors, what we heard was there's this push that normally happens just before an audit takes place, whether it's an internal audit or an external validation audit. A lot of work goes into making sure that everything's hardened, everything's compliant, everything passes the audit, only to have things change and adjust in the next few days, few weeks, few months between the audit, and move out of compliance. And so from a CISO standpoint, what we heard them say is, I know on the day of the audit everything's good, but that's only a window in time. And so the continuous compliant aspect of this allows us to create schedules that scans this on a day, a week, a month, however frequently you want. And then, of course, the remediation and action part means that you're putting it back into the proper state so that kind of comfort that a CISO could have lasts longer than a few minutes at the time of the audit, because every night he knows that his systems are being scanned and properly remediated. Next slide. Now, of course, all of this is really based off of the core SaltStack capabilities and components, right? So I think everybody's familiar at the end of SaltConf, hopefully, with what the master minion and the reactor system is. But to just give you a sense of how this was built and how it kind of came to be, if you think about that reactor system, what we're really looking at is saying, from a security standpoint, a lot of what we're doing here is config drift, right? So if we've got a certain setting on our compliance, continuous compliance piece, and we're watching that, we want to watch, and in this case, we're going to scan. So we're not necessarily using beacons and reactors, but we're going to scan and find out where there's a discrepancy. Kind of that minion steps out and says, hey, I'm no longer in compliance. And then we can trigger the action to say, go ahead and put this back in its proper state. And so in this case, we're pre-filling, if you will, what we're looking for with the content that we've provided, identifying where a minion steps out of line and then putting it back into the proper state, giving us that sense of kind of a self-healing life cycle here. This is just a quick list of where we have both the CIS benchmarks, the CIS and STIG benchmarks, and the vulnerability management. Like I said, most of the major distributions are covered. We've done a great job focusing in on CIS for the first couple of years. Now we're going back and starting to fill in some of the CIS and STIG components. We'll continue to grow that as we do our 2022 planning. And then in the middle, of course, are those repos where we're pulling the vulnerabilities and the known vulnerabilities for these operating systems. This, I believe, is hosted out on the VMware website now, so you can get kind of a more real-time version of this as we make changes and make releases. So this is actually just kind of starting to look as we look forward into the next couple of months of our release cycle. One of the things that we're really excited about is a carbon black integration. And so if I keep seeing my screen pop on and off, hopefully my internet's not crashing on me, but in the next
okay, we're just losing video a little bit, but your audio is fine.
All right, good. So over the next month, we're going to make the first release of our carbon black integration. And it's going to focus in on workloads with our workload protect, which is a component within carbon black, and focus really on their Windows operating systems. And just like we do with Tenable, this will be an API integration that allows us to connect the carbon black, pull in the real-time scans as they're taking place, and then remediate any discrepancies that we find or vulnerabilities that we find. As I mentioned, this will be kind of a first release. The next piece of that is we were going to start working with the Linux machines. And then we'll go further from that into, like we've got highlighted here, some of the endpoint, potentially the endpoint remediation pieces. Or of course, because of the VMware aspect, we'll be looking into some of the vSphere integrations with Carbon Black as well. So there's a few ways that this will go. We're going to start with that workload protect piece and go from there. Another area that's really exciting for us is there's some other acquisitions within VMware like Secure State and Cloud Health that we're starting to have discussions with and understanding kind of the designs that they use for their cloud management and cloud automation, and looking at how SaltStack and especially SecOps can play into those capabilities to provide a comprehensive cloud management solution that goes beyond what we normally do or what our area of focus is, and of course what the cloud health area of focus is, to provide a great kind of joint effort for broad cloud management that covers cost, security of cloud services, and then SaltStack bringing in the security of the infrastructure itself. Next slide. This just goes a little bit deeper into that area. And this really is just to point out the fact that we believe that this is a very complementary story, right? If we look at the cloud health side, they're very much looking at the security of the services themselves, like the S3 bucket, the IAM roles, the security groups. And then SaltStack comes in and, of course, covers the infrastructure side of this. And so it's very much a better together story that we're really excited about developing and building into over the next couple of releases. All right, next slide.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of lag. There we go. When I click them.
I talked a little bit about this earlier, but this will just kind of double down on it, right? So from a SaltStack standpoint, we've always been focused on the notion of remediation. And we know that in the market, there's a lot of marketing that goes on that claims remediation from other areas, other vendors, other third parties. But the reality is that most of them look at remediation as really just being, hey, we gave you the information, we gave you a report, now you can go and take the action that you need. And from our standpoint, that's always been kind of stopping short. And so remediation from a SaltStack standpoint is always being able to take that action. And where we've seen a great example of this is with our Carbon Black integration. Carbon Black does a great job of identifying where the issues are, where the vulnerabilities are, and then we're able to take that handoff, right? They pass us the baton. We're able to then go take the action and pass back to them saying, hey, you can do another scan and everything should be green. And so we'll continue to have our focus be on that action piece, on that remediation piece, and then plugging into a broader ecosystem of places where we feel vendors have stopped short, and creating good partnership and good alliance where we can kind of take that action and reduce the time to remediation. Next slide. All right. Hand it off back over to you, Karl.
Okay, so it's my turn. Give me a sec to get started. Let's see. And it doesn't look like we have any questions just yet. So let me just get into my environment. Some of the stuff timed out. And where I'm going to start, we're going to walk through SecOps and what that looks like. And then I'm also going to, we'll get rid of NSX. We don't need to see that today. Nothing wrong with it, but not relevant. What we're going to look at also is I've got a DevSecOps pipeline that I'm going to walk through that leverages a lot of the different stuff that Alex just talked about, as well as just some art of the possible scenarios that we can do with Service Broker, CodeStream, and CloudAssembly. And so let's just open that up, and I'm going to kick that off just because we got a little bit we're a little short on time for the session, so I just want to make sure that we have something available for you to use. And let's get actually into the correct environment. And I'll kick that off. So Service Broker, as we kind of briefly talked about, was our storefront, and there's a lot of different things a Service Broker can do, but primarily, for this use case, we're going to use it to show how we can launch a pipeline, a DevSecOps pipeline. That's going to include a virtual machine. It's going to include a website, a database, and we'll go through some different assessment and remediation scenarios in that pipeline. All right, so we'll name this 2, and I'll go ahead and kick that off, and then that's going to run in the background while we're doing our thing here on the SecOps side. Okay, so I've logged into my SaltStack config environment, and then once I enable the SecOps functionality, if you haven't seen it before, you're going to see compliance and vulnerability appear in the UI. And there's a number of things that are going on here. The first is, of course, we're making use of targets, right? So if you're not familiar with targets, those are essentially groupings of minions that we can apply compliance and vulnerability policies to, to do our compliance and vulnerability management with. And in addition to that, there's sort of some other areas that we tend to focus on. So we talk about SecOps, and we talk about how it's a process, and we recognize that there are security folks and there are IT folks that are often doing different things. There's a division of labor there. So we have roles-based access control in the product that allows us to change up the look feel of the UI so that the security person can, for example, go through and create the policy. They can run the assessment, and then when that assessment's done and they've sort of gone through and marked, hey, this is what's relevant, this is what we need to make, and what we need to go ahead and remediate or exempt, then they can hand that off to IT. IT can log in, and then they would have the ability to remediate, right, and sort of rinse, repeat, and then you can hand it back to security when it's done to sort of attest to the fact that, hey, we're no longer vulnerable for these CVEs. We're now compliant for this upcoming audit, right? So as we go in and take a look at that, I'll kind of highlight where some of those differences would be, and I'm going to get through that relatively quickly just to give you some sense of what that is. So I've selected the policies on the compliance side first. We get a rundown on our compliance summary, right? The number of checks that have been assessed, the number that are remediated, number of runs, as well as a breakdown right on different areas of regulatory compliance that were either compliant or not compliant within that color coding. And then I have my policies along the bottom here. And you can see I've got 2 policies that are already created. This one's my DevSecOps policy that we'll use in a little bit. And then I have a DB servers policy that I've defined, that I've already run an assessment and remediation against. Let's go ahead and create a policy, though, just to give you a sense of what that looks like. Alex talked a little bit about how you can sort of make this granular, particularly on the compliance side, based around what's relevant to you from a compliance perspective. And this could be using CIS benchmarks, could be some of the CIS and STIG checks that we bring in as well, or it could be those custom checks that Alex mentioned that we have an SDK for. So we'll go ahead and create our policy, and this is for my web servers. And I've already got a target set up for my web servers. And I'll click next. And I've already, I didn't show you that, but oops, actually, I'll go back to that. This is our set of benchmarks that we have. You can see we have over 100 benchmarks that we're bringing in, primarily CIS, pertaining to our operating systems. And if I go all the way to the end here, I think it's back one page. I can also expand and show them all. This is just for the sake of the demo, I'm just going about it this way. So I've got 2 different levels for many of my CIS benchmarks. And so generally speaking, you're probably going to pick level 1. Level 2 is what CIS calls a defense in depth level. And the thinking there is you minimize your attack surface quite a bit more with level 2 than you do level 1. Level 1 is really sort of a balance between I'm protecting my environment, I'm minimizing my attack surface to a certain degree, but I'm also not necessarily doing things that might impact my business processes, right? And so if I'm picking something like level 2, that's an area where I would say, you know what, I want to make sure that I'm testing any of these checks, any of these configuration changes I'm making when I remediate before I get into a production setting. So that being said, right, I'm going to want to do that with a level 1 and level 2, but especially with a level 2 as you look at that, highly recommend that. Now, for the level 1 benchmark and checks, we'll go ahead and select that. And I've already got a filter set, so let's clear that just to get a sense of what we're looking at. So we can see there's a large number of checks that are included in this Ubuntu benchmark, of 186 of them, and each one is slightly different. Obviously, it depends on what the configuration requirements and compliance requirements are for each independent operating system. In this case, I don't want to go through and select all of the checks. The ones that are relevant to me are SSH and cron. So using filters, I can type SSH, and then it brings me down to a sort of much more manageable list of checks that I may want to assess against my environment to understand posture specifically for SSH. I can go ahead and select all of them. I can select individual checks if I want to. If I'm not sure what the check is about, right? What does this mean to me? Why is this important to me? I can select sort of my sideways arrows there, look at my OS finger, look at the different reference information, my detail information, and then most importantly, I can look at the state file that we would apply against the given minion when we would remediate. Interesting also, this is what we use when we're running our assessment, right? So I'm comparing this against the state of my minion, and that's how I'm identifying, hey, am I compliant with this particular check? Am I not compliant? Am I vulnerable? Am I not vulnerable? Depending on what the scenario is. Okay, so I've added those, and then what I'd like to do is add some additional checks. So I just clear out my filter here, and I also want to look at cron. So since I selected my SSH checks before, you can see they're still listed. I'm going to add additional cron checks here, and I've got, that adds up to 22. So I'm off and running in terms of the checks that I've selected for my policy. Now, a really cool thing that we can do is some of the checks have variables that we can change. And if you want to know what each does, we have information bubbles that you can click on to sort of get some idea of what that check is. But for example, if I want to change like my SSHD config max auth retries, I could set that, for example, to a smaller number, still compliant, but maybe something that's palatable or relevant to my environment. And then when I kick off my assessment and then remediation, we'll go ahead and set that within the state on the minion for that particular check. Okay, So I've gone ahead and selected that. I've got a lot of different scheduling options here. I can set up recurring assessments if I'd like to. I can do so at many different levels if I want. I can also set start dates and end dates if I want to. I can set repeat dates and times if I want to stay at that level. I can do it once, as well as use cron expressions if I choose to. In this case, I'm going to set it to not scheduled. Oh, and one last thing too, I can also set the number of maximum, the maximum number of parallel jobs, right? So if I have one running, it's going to queue any additional jobs that would run against this policy as an example. Okay. And against that minion, I should say. So I'm going to run the assessment, and let's go ahead and click save. And that's going to take a minute to run. So let's go take a look at the vulnerability side. And it's a pretty similar story on the vulnerability side, right? So I'm targeting, targets, and which are groupings of minions, as you recall. And in this case, I've already run this against a set of database servers. I'm going to sort of go through the same process here. I'm going to create a quick policy before I kind of go back and go through the interface. And we're going to call this one web servers as well. And in this case, with CVEs, we obviously want to look at this and understand exactly where I'm vulnerable and where I'm not. And so there's really not this notion of choosing specific CVEs or not. Now, I can choose which CVEs to remediate after I've run my assessment. But from an assessment standpoint, we really want to identify everywhere we're vulnerable for this operating system based on the CVE information that we've pulled down, depending on where it's come from. Okay, so I've targeted my my web servers. The schedule is identical essentially to what we have on the compliance side. I'm just going to go ahead and run my assessment. Okay, so let's go back over to the compliance side and see how we're doing here. We can see our policy. We can see where we're compliant, and we can see that we're not compliant across most of the checks for these Ubuntu images. If I want to understand where I am in terms of activity, I can always click on activity and I can look at my job information if I want to. So if I want to look at summary level info for my minions to understand exactly what was run, if I want to look at my high state information, I can do that. I can get a raw look at exactly what was checked on those individual minions, and then I could get sort of a job info, what was expected and what was returned in terms of what ran in that environment. Okay, so if I want to dig in a little bit more on the web servers themselves and understand where I'm compliant, again, I can sort of look at each one of the checks, understand, what about this makes me compliant, what doesn't make me compliant. If I want to say, add an exemption to any one of these, I can add information here to explain why I'm doing that. And what that means is obviously that's going to be exempt from assessment and remediation later on if I choose to go that route. Now, as someone with the permission, like an IT person, I could go ahead and remediate at this level. And this would remediate all of the checks that are available on this page for both of the minions in this target group, or for as many minions that are in a given target group, I should say. Alternatively, I can remediate at an individual minion level if I'd like to do that, or I can exempt an entire minion, right, if I want to do that. So as I go and look at this, you can see what's been exempted for a given minion and get more information on why that might be there, if they've added that in the notes, something more than perhaps I've added there, or you can remove the exemption at this level as well if you want to do that. We also have the ability to provide reports, a report, and you can obviously view this within the UI, or you can download and view this in JSON format if you'd like to. So switching back over to vulnerabilities, I have my web servers and this is completed. And so as I click in here, we have the ability to go through and look at the severity of the different CVEs that are being applied. I can also look at the advisory information for a given CVE, how it applies to or applies against or doesn't against a given minion if I'd like to. I can also look at my scoring from CVSS. So I can, if you're into version 2.0 or 3.0, typically is going to give you a lot more granularity if you're tracking it at that level. But we also have the 2.0 level too, if you don't require that level of granularity. I've seen it kind of different depending on the auditors that are involved. But at this level, obviously, I'm going to get a sense on, hey, what's critical in my environment? What's a high level, of severity, what's medium. And the other thing too that I can do is I can set filters here too. So maybe this weekend, all I care about are remediating my critical CVEs, right? I want to address this. I've got to deal with it now. I can easily go ahead and do that. Maybe the other stuff, we haven't fully tested it. I want to wait. I could easily do that using this capability with filtering, right? And we have similar notion on the compliance side too. Although obviously the criticality doesn't necessarily apply in that example. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll remediate these. I'll just go to this level and we'll click remediate. And we'll do the same thing within here. Yep, and so we're good. And I'll just go ahead and remediate. Okay, so that's going to take a few minutes. Let's switch over to and see what's going on the service broker side. So we can see immediately that we have our pipeline that's kicked off inside service broker via my deployment. And then I actually have my virtual machine here. And if we go back over to SaltStack, we should actually see, yep. So there's our VM right there that's already been added. It's been added to the target, so the deployment should be pretty close to being done. And let's open up inside CodeStream. And I'm going to walk through the pipeline. Actually, let's take a look at our executions here. So this is a set of executions that make up our pipeline. And we have sort of what I've done is I've added user, the ability for a user to be involved in this pipeline process as my tasks work through, as my stages work through. So I've completed my deployment here. I'm probably still installing Apache in my database for my website, but I can already get interesting information here. Like I can see my IP address. Let's just go ahead and grab that. And just that way we can see how our website's doing. Great. So our website's up, and this was actually installed between CloudAssembly and SaltStack config. So CloudAssembly sort of did the initial provisioning, right, using this information that you see here. So I have my IP address and my networking information came from my configurations in CloudAssembly, my image that I'm using, my CloudInit configuration that I'm using. We're using a little bit of CloudInit in that template to lay down some configurations in the operating system. But you get the idea, right? You can see the network that's been associated and so on. So I can take this information. I can also view the output in JSON if I'd like to, if I want to use that in an external tool, and understand exactly what it is that's been deployed, including the application, including the software configurations. So the next thing that I want to do, since I know my VM is up and running and my website's actually going, is go ahead and run a compliance and vulnerability assessment. So this is essentially what we did within the UI side on within SSC SecOps. But in this case, since we're running it through a pipeline, we've got the ability to set an approve or reject for the pipeline. So I'll go ahead and click approve. And the thought process here is, hey, I've made my VM deployment for test purposes, or maybe this could be production as well. And now I want to run this compliance and vulnerability assessment against this virtual machine, remediate the virtual machine as well if required. And then I've got an approve or reject set for each stage, so that if I run into issues with the deployment, for example, or if I run into issues with the compliance and vulnerability posture, I can back that out, sort of rinse, repeat, go through any changes that I might need to make in that pipeline, and then start over with a new execution. So it gives us a lot of different abilities to not only automate this entire process, but have some user control in the process as well where it's required. Okay, so we can see that our task is run, and if I go over and look at Moad Web Services here. Just checking my time. Looks like I'm getting a little close. I can see that it should be on page 2. Yeah, there we go. So we can see that that's run. Let's go take a look over here. Yep, and so we can see it's run on this side. So our assessment has run from CodeStream, and we'll give that just a sec just to make sure that both of those assessments are complete. And I'm just going to talk real quick through the pipeline. So what CodeStream allows us to do is really tie a number of different capabilities together for DevOps style use cases, right? So infrastructure pipelines, application pipelines, DevSecOps, like I'm talking about right now. So the first thing we do, as I'd mentioned in that execution, is I'm going through and creating my deployment. And in this case, as I'd mentioned, I'm calling a cloud template within CloudAssembly, right? And in the cloud template is the OpenCart website. We're installing our OpenCart application. And then I have my different inputs that help me determine exactly what needs to happen based on that host name and also based on my deployment name, right? So I have scripts that are set to look for these inputs and then trigger certain actions based on these inputs once I kick off or execute a pipeline, whether it's through Service Broker or I just run it directly within CodeStream. Once that's done, that's where that execution starts. As I had mentioned, here are these user operations that give me the ability to kind of put that pause in there and do the approve reject. And you can see where I'm running my custom integration tasks. And really what these are is we're making API calls using the eAPI into SSE into SecOps to trigger these assessments and these remediations. And there's a lot of different options that we have available to us that I can select. So these are all API calls that I made. And this is one that I'm working on right now where it sends a webhook out to Slack to notify me when this pipeline is complete. So just some different examples of what you have. Now, you also have a lot of different areas. So this is what kind of highlights the power of CodeStream. In this case, I'm doing a custom integration task, but I can do, a separate pipeline. I can work with Kubernetes directly. In fact, my workspace that I'm using, I'm not using Kubernetes in this one, but I am in a different pipeline. In this case, I'm just using a Docker workspace, but we can work directly with Kubernetes from CodeStream to do, cloud native type activities, right? Or work with Jenkins or work with Bamboo. So there's a lot of different options available to me for each of these tasks that I can tie together to complete and run through an execution of a pipeline. Okay. So as you can see, we kind of move through and each one has its own API calls. And then at the end, we have a little bit of a demonstration of our beacon reactor system. And we're going to show a configuration drift scenario where our website gets hacked. And as soon as I'm done with the remediation, I'll show you what that looks like. And then at the end, we have a cleanup process that we've just added so that when Chris McClanahan runs this demo here in a little bit, it'll be nice and clean and ready for him to go. So let's just go ahead and discard that because we're not using it. Okay, so we're waiting on me to go ahead and kick off the remediation. I'm gonna approve that. And while we're waiting here for that to run, I'm gonna switch over real quick to CloudAssembly and just give you a sense of what that looks like with our actual cloud template. And I know we're getting kind of close to time here. Hopefully we can go just a little bit over. So we have our OpenCart website. This is our cloud template that we're using. Pretty simple cloud template. I'm defining my network that I'm using. I'm also adding my salt minion. And these are the different inputs that I'm using, right? You recall that I was talking about the host name and the deployment name. Some of that is coming from this cloud template and the inputs that we have here. We can also see where we're defining our machine, the OS image, our size for this. And then this is where we get into Cloud Init. And we're using Cloud Init in this case to install our minion and do some different configurations. You can see we're updating APT, and then I'm also, when I'm installing my minion, I'm pointing it to a master. Now this is a relatively simple config. We have another one that we're doing with ABX where we add the minion and allow you to choose from a bunch of masters that we have in the environment, and that we're using in some of our other demos at SaltConf. In this case, I'm also setting a grain for my deployment that for the application open cart, and I'm picking up that grain and using that to, as a trigger for the installation of open cart from my environment. Okay, so let's take a look at this. This should be done. I'm going to go ahead and do my post remediation assessment. We still do need to run an assessment after we remediate to update the information and so that we're sure that we've actually gone through and remediate any of the compliance scenarios or vulnerabilities that we run into in the environment. So that should be running here in a second. And again, this is just triggering API calls into SecOps, and I'll let that run for just a moment and head back over here. And just to give you a sense of some of the other stuff that we're working on. So this is an example where we're using CloudAssembly to, this is where I mentioned we're using an ABX action, that's action-based extensibility, and we're using a mixture of PowerShell or Python, depending on the operating system, to install our minion, to also add our carbon black sensor for the integration that we have forthcoming here in a couple of weeks. And I can use, so I'm using that to sort of set all of the different configurations here. This is one method of doing it. Obviously, we can do quite a bit of this within SaltStack config as well. Right now, we're sort of using it from our demo purposes to lay down the initial configuration with CloudAssembly, and then letting SaltStack config deploy our application and deploy any of the configurations that are around that application or database. Okay, so we're done with our remediation. I'm going to go ahead and launch my website hack. And again, this is a sort of demonstration of our beacon reactor system and a configuration change. So I'll click approve. That's going to kick that off. And then we'll just kind of go and look and see what potentially could be happening to our website. And oh no, it looks like Tom Hatch has a little free time on his hand, and he's gotten in and hacked our website so he can promote SaltConf 21. Well, the good news is there's no worries. We're going through and we're looking at our index.php file, and we're going to put that back to a known good state using our beacon reactor system. And that is Salt, by the way, falling on his head. I thought that was a nice touch. And it seems like he's pretty persistent. This is supposed to be picking this up and putting it back. Interesting. Okay. Well, this was working a little bit earlier. Tom apparently has more free time on his hands than I had thought. But the ideal is here that the beacon would set up a notification, go across the event bus, the reactor would pick it up, and then we would put the known good index.php file back.
Yeah, it salted you.
It is a good point, Jeff, that he may have a beacon working against us, knowing him. He's a wily individual. Okay, so that sort of finishes up my demo. I know we're right at time. I just wanted to see if there are any questions.
So there was one from Jeff Neal. Alex and I separately answered. Just wanted to make sure that we bring this into the audio portion of the recording. He asks, can the targeted minions here be physical hosts, or are they required to be VMs in vCenter? Are there any downsides to targeting physical hosts if that is possible? So the initial answer there, it depends, but it depends on if you're talking about things from the SaltStack side, which is going to be very operating system, either operating system centric, although also operating system agnostic in terms of it wants to just work with the single machine. From the VRA side, in terms of having visibility into individual machines that are, that might be part of a Salt workflow or something like that, you're going to see, and by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, Karl, but you'll see a little bit of limited visibility there from the VRA side.
Right. We used to work with physical workloads in the older versions of VRA, and it from a priority standpoint, it hasn't been coming up anywhere near as much as it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so it's not that it's not possible. I mean, you could certainly get visibility into VRA using extensibility, right, with VRO or ABX, or on the SaltStack side, of course. and we could do, work with custom resources to sort of bring that onto the canvas. Having it under management, though, is the tough part. And we're not going to be able to data collect that information in VRA, and that's where I think it's not going to be as visible to you as you might like.
Well, that's all I see in the Q&A. So we might be. This might have been my only session to wrap up anywhere close to on time.
And I could probably keep going if you want.
Yeah, let's do that. I think between the three of us, we could probably do like a day-long session.
I need to figure out why this didn't work, because literally Chris and I have been doing this and working on this for the last couple of days, and it has worked flawlessly, which of course it wouldn't work when we get into a demo scenario.
Absolutely. That's the you're demonstrating the perils of live demos.
Exactly. Which is part of the reason I did a video for VMworld. So, okay. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate everybody attending today. I hope you enjoyed the demo. There's a bunch of great demos, I think, that are happening in about an hour, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Chunga. And
one of those is mine, yeah. Probably.
So, and one of them is yours. Okay. So you're going to see a similar demo from Chris. Hopefully it works for him.
There you go. So you get to
see it work.
Redemption there.
Yeah.
Really quick before we kick everybody out, I know we're in the waning seconds here. Rob Robertson, I know that Vincent uncovered a bug in relation to pushing files to the minion from the master, maybe playing a part. That's definitely possible. I don't know. Are you on 3004?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe that's what's going on there.
Okay.
Under the covers, but really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you to both Karl and Alex for sharing their wisdom and their road mapping with us, as well as everything that's going on. Thank you to all of you attendees for being here. There is one more session left. You have a handful of choices here. It looks like Tom Hatch is doing a deep dive into Tiamat. Tyler Johnson is going through some of his getting started with plugin-oriented programming. He's a major proponent of that portion of what's being worked on. And then I think we added a session from the guys in GSS, including Ken Jordan, for those of you who remember him from the original SALT support staff. And they're talking a little bit about recruitment efforts or opportunities, to contribute to the team on the VMware side. Anything else, Karl or Alex, that I might have left out there?
I don't think so. Really appreciate everybody's time.
And then after that last session is the demo jam. As Chunga described it, it got separated into its own session because it was a nerd tsunami sucking everybody away from the other sessions at that time. So I'll see you there probably. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your sessions, and by all means, jump onto the community Slack or anywhere else. There are plenty of ways to get a hold of us if you have any further questions about any of this. Thank you again.
Okay, thanks a lot.